Part of the proposal assignment requires you to fill out the project planning worksheets, which will help you plan your recommendation report project. You can find the project planning worksheets in the proposal assignment instructions. There are 3 total project planning worksheets, and I'm just going to quickly take you through them to make sure that you understand what you're supposed to do for each worksheet. The first project planning worksheet asks you to analyze the situation and the 2 alternatives that you'll be comparing in your recommendation report project. So first of all, you need to think about who the organization is and what their problem is that you will be responding to in your recommendation report. You also need to think about the specific context that may affect the decision, and this includes both the immediate workplace context and any broader context that might affect how the decision plays out. And then you also need to analyze the purpose, benefits, effectiveness, or positive consequences of choosing one alternative over another, and the possible negative consequences of not choosing any solution to this problem. Then you need to figure out the criteria that you will be using to evaluate the 2 options against each other. So what is the ultimate goal that should be achieved by the best alternative? What criteria can be used to determine that ultimate goal? And why are these 2 options in particular the best 2 options to be comparing for your recommendation report? Next, you're going to do an initial analysis of the 2 options that you're going to be comparing. And you'll answer the same questions for each option, and then we'll move on to project planning worksheet number 2, which is going to be a more in-depth analysis of your audience. So we're going to think about primary audience, secondary audience, and tertiary audience. Your primary audience is likely going to be the person who requested that you write this recommendation report, and it will probably be the person who is making the decision. So this would likely be your supervisor. Your primary audience is of course going to be determined by the imaginary scenario that you are inventing to respond to. So you should think about that person's level of knowledge or expertise in this specific field, what his or her goals are, what his or her job responsibility is, what sort of attitude this person is going to be approaching your recommendation report from, if there are particular reading style or other needs that you need to be addressing. For example, if your primary audience has a business background and you are an IT professional, you need to really consider what sorts of technical terms is your reader going to be familiar with, and what sorts of technical terms do you need to define in a glossary. And then you also need to consider the expectations and assumptions that that primary audience is going to be arriving with. Then you also need to think about secondary audiences and potential tertiary audiences. Secondary audience might include budgeting professionals, perhaps the company lawyer, perhaps the board of directors of the company. These are going to be people who will also be looking at your recommendation report, but are not the immediate audience for whom the report was written. And then you should also consider if there might be even further removed audience members. For example, is it possible that this report may then become public? At that point, you would need to still have in mind the needs of the public who will be reading this. Is this report going to be forwarded to another company? So you need to also be considering the tertiary audiences. In the third worksheet, we're going to think about the research that you're going to need to perform. So all your research is going to be shaped around a series of questions. So any question that you need to find the answer to, you'll write down in the question to answer / criteria to evaluate. You'll think then about what you need to find the answer to that question. Then you'll need to think about, okay, so I know my question, I know what information I need to be able to answer that question. So then what's my research methodology? Am I going to look it up in scholarly journals? Am I going to create a survey? Am I going to perform an interview? What am I going to do to find that information that is going to then help me answer the question? And then you can take it that step further and say, okay, if I'm going to look in scholarly journals, here are some potential journals. If I'm going to interview somebody, here are some potential people who I might interview. Please do not feel like you have to stick to the amount of space that is provided on these worksheets. As you fill them out, you may find that you need more space, and that's fine. These things will get a little messy. That's okay. These are not final, beautiful, pristine technical documents where we're really going to be concerned about the ultimate layout and design. You just need to fill them in, use as much space as you need, and then save what you've created so that you can submit the worksheets when you submit the proposal.